I came over from Lithuania in 1949. Didn't know the language and had to learn the language, and got involved with a boyfriend who was into cars, taught me how to drive on a 120 Jaguar. And within 20 years, I was flying on private jets around the world, timing race cars, and have a PR business started already, having worked with Carl Ludwigsen. And during that time, you just did it. You just went with the flow. My career is going with the flow. I had no goals. If it weren't for my boyfriend and his interest, who knows where I would have surfaced on a professional level. Instead, I became a professional timer, started a PR business. People think that I stopped timing or retired from and started a PR business. No, I always had the PR business at the same time. I also raced cars at the same time. I did all of that at the same time. I mean, it was just magnificent. And I look back and say, wow, how freaking lucky am I still, and how freaking lucky I was to have been there and done that and just going with the flow. So having discovered that I had this ability with a stopwatch by learning from the women who were timing cars at the Queens Sports Car Club on Long Island, New York. And I said, okay, I can do that. And I said, what's next? They were surprised. It was quite easy for me. And it was a unique ability, something up here. And I just was at the right place at the right time. The sport was just beginning with manufacturers coming in, and races were getting longer. I had an Alfa Romeo, and I was going to the races already. I was writing for the newsletter for the Queen Sports Car Club, so I was going to races. These were my excuse to write articles. And also, I was out of Bridgehampton, went to a party, maybe had a little bit too much to drink. I ended up crashing the Alfa at the end of the road of where I was. That's another story and another time. But I spent the night in the hospital. My friends came in a Corvette to pick me up. There was no room for me to take me back, so somebody else had to bring me back. And now I had to go to Marlborough, Maryland for a under 2-liter race before the 5-hour Trans Am race, professional. So I took a bus down there, and I was writing for Auto Week already at that time. I had a column. Duke Manor, who was writing for Auto Week at that time, he and his girlfriend Charlie became friends of mine. And they were in New York. They picked me up at the bus station, wherever Marlborough, Maryland's bus station was. And I promised to score an under 2-liter race for a friend of mine from New York in a Volvo, and I did that. So that evening I went to a cocktail reception with Duke and Charlie, and all the Lincoln Mercury guys were there. Bud Moore was there because they were running the Cougars. Fran Hernandez from Ford says, it's a 5-hour race tomorrow. How do we know what position we're in? This is before computers. And Duke says, well, Judy does that. And I go, oh, right, I'm drinking. Yeah, I do that. He says, okay, we'll pay you $25 tomorrow to do the 5-hour race. So you'll see a picture in my book. I'm sitting on a toolbox that they put on the back of the truck. This truck is now in Three Dog Garage in Pennsylvania. And they put ramps up because it looked like it might rain. They took some of the ramps and they were able to put them up above me. And I did a 5-hour race on my lap. I guess I had a clipboard. And I knew it was perfect. And I think Penske won. I wasn't working for them. I was working for Bud Moore. They took the lap chart. And next week they all called me. Bud Moore called me. Fran Hernandez called me. Said, we want you to come out west to Modesto. This is a NASCAR team. They've never seen a female on a team. And so I show up, in California. Hey guys. They go all staring at me, the crew, the mechanics. They don't know why is this woman here? Then it all took off. Following year, they went to Mustang, but they had to use this other group of timers, not one individual, and they were apologized profusely, but they had to go. And then the Javelin team picked me up, the Jim Jeffords team. And in the middle of that, Penske walks up and says, why aren't you working for me? And keeps walking. I go, who is that guy? Oh, I know who it is. Then I started work with them, Javelin team for Trans Am, and then Penske for Can-Am the same year. And then the following year, I went with Penske. And then everybody wanted my services before computers. After I left Penske, I went to work for dozens of IMSA teams. And I joke about that I would bill them all a small invoice with expenses and a fee, then matter much to them. But when you added it up for 15, 20 teams, I made a lot of money. Again, I still had the PR business. I was representing Chevrolet. People think maybe Roger had something to do. I had Chevrolet before I even started timing professionally. So, and BMW, I had lots of clients. During practice and qualifying, you time pretty much every car, every lap to get your position in the field, and especially in qualifying. And you know you'll have that information right away. So you know during qualifying where you stand, which now you just look at a computer, but back then there were none. That's different. So I would time 30, 40, whatever number of cars I could time in practice and qualifying so that the team would know where they stood. The race, you score the race, so you score every single car in the race. I would then have like assistants. I would put wives and girlfriends to work and teach them how to time 2 or 3 cars. And they'll have their charts, they'll sit there and they can time 2 or 3 cars as backup. But I would count all the laps of every car on the lap chart, and 24-hour race chart would be this big. I eventually semi-computerized it when there were monitors that came out. I had so many teams that I wanted to give them the information in their pits. So I set up a system where I could put a monitor in the pits of the people who were paying me. And I put coaxial cables in between, and we set it up. My assistant would have the keyboard. I would still do everything manually. And she would look over my shoulder and type it in so it would show up in order on the screen. And that was, pseudo-computerized scoring, but it was still manual, That became such a headache. That was part of the reason I finally retired after a while, because it became such a headache because, the engineers can build super race cars, but they don't know that you turn on the monitor. I mean, give me a break. And they'd come running over to me and my assistant or whatever, and they say, it doesn't work. I can't get the screen on. And I send somebody over, and they just have to turn it on, But I had to collect the coaxial cables at the end. I'll collect all the monitors, find a race team that will carry them for me. I started that race in Marlboro, Maryland was in 1967. The Trans Am was already 1 year old or whatever, maybe 2. Somewhere in the 70s, Roger decided to cut back on team people, and you don't need me unless you have to make a pit stop in a race. Like if it's a sprint race, you don't really need me. So Roger was not running in the IMSA teams. The IMSA teams that were running longer distances, like Brumos, like Peter Gregg picked me up right after that, and so I started working with them. So that was through the 70s and 80s, and then once again the monitors and all that work with the coaxial cables and all. It was probably 80s, 90s, somewhere in there. It was just before the 24-hour of Daytona, and I always had a bunch of teams that I worked for that race. And I sent a letter to them all saying, okay, I'd like you to commit to my services by a certain date for the 24 hours of Daytona. If I don't hear from you by that date, I am retiring. I heard from one team, Roush team, I think. By that, I said, okay, one team wasn't going to do it. I really wanted to retire, so I was hoping nobody would commit. So only having one team didn't do it. And then as soon as that deadline, they started calling me after that. And I said, too late, I'm retiring. Well, I was very good, so I didn't make mistakes except one time. One time that counted. I made little mistakes that didn't count. The teams I worked for always ran up front. And that's where you don't want to screw up. If you're running 15s, 16s, what difference does it make? So any mistake in the back of the field, I can correct, I can figure it out. There are ways to figure it out with information that the officials do give you every hour. They give you a sheet every hour. You can check back on anything. But up front, so it was Riverside. And I know there was one car that came by. I didn't see a number on it. It was like, where was the number on it? It was John Fitzpatrick's number one, which is a terrible number, because it was at an angle. And I saw louver. And I didn't know which car I had missed. And it turned out to be like the winner or the top. Oh my God, it made the newspapers. It was like, oh, everybody. Now, they get angry with me, and it makes all the papers. My friend Leslie Ann Taylor, who was assisting me, lived in LA at the time. I was like taken and hidden away at her apartment, like to get away from media and whatever else. I was forgiven for it eventually, but it made the newspapers headlines because I missed one lap on one car that should have been the winning car, and I had the wrong winning car or something like that because it was up front. To this day, I hate that fact. I hate that happened. That shouldn't have happened? I couldn't figure out what car it was. One day I got a call from George Levy, who was president of the Hall of Fame. First, he warned me. He says, "Oh, I just want to let you know that you've been nominated." Oh, I said, "Oh, good, thanks. That's great. That's fine." I didn't expect to be voted in. And then the next call, he called. I'm in the airport somewhere, and I'm walking, and the phone rings, and it's George. And he goes, I wanted to let you know that you've been voted into the Hall of Fame." I said, I'm sorry, do you have the right number? He goes, "Isn't this Janet Guthrie?" He had a great sense of humor. I laughed so hard. And it was the same year that Janet also was inducted. I'm the only female in the sports car category that has been inducted.
I'm at the Lars Anderson Auto Museum, home of America's oldest car collection, and they are holding a sweepstakes where one of you is going to win this Porsche 992. You can enter at the link in the description below, and you will have an amazing car, but much more importantly, you'll be helping keep America's car culture alive. The Lars Anderson Auto Museum is the hub of New England car culture, and that is why every week here on the grounds, there's something amazing happening. So if you're in the Boston area, come say hey, and either way, enter to win this thing because it's awesome.